What's going on, guys? Well, it's your boy, No Legs, bringing you the podcast. Howdy do.
Howdy do da.
Yeah,
We were having a little discussion we want to bring the audience into, and that is telling a story.
storytelling with imagery.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
a
What
lot of you go ahead.
I was gonna ask actually, like because this is something that I find fascinating. How would you define storytelling through imagery? Because I feel like there could be tons of different interpretations.
I feel like storytelling through imagery is anything you don't have to like explain with words, right? Something you can just show the player or give to the player or give to the viewer, or the viewer can just see it happening on screen at some point and know what's going on based on what they interpret is going on. Things like, Five Nights at Freddy's primarily is a game that's told its story with imagery over years, and I can't even believe I'm saying that, but that is a really good example.
It is. Another good example I would have to say is like secondhand storytelling, which I kind of define as like not directly telling the player that two characters are related, but it being like, oh, we're drawing them in very similar ways, so that way you can just put it together yourself, and we don't have to overtly tell you in like an unnatural way.
Right, you can just see it.
Hmm.
It's just there for the player. Scarlet Nexus did that really well
Yes,
with
Scarlet Texas
no
did.
no spoilers. I'm not even gonna mention where it happens, but Scarlet Nexus did that really well. If you haven't played that, excellent game.
Recommend
You
big
did.
time.
You and I did. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Pokemon does it very well. You have like Team Galaxy's Mars and all them, and how that might connect to like Silver and other characters throughout the franchise. And they never like overtly say, "Here's an ancestral like legacy." But as you play the games, you kind of put the world together and this timeline together that is never overtly told.
Right. You just kind of have to interpret in which order things happen.
Right. And I
A lot
don't.
like the Zelda timeline.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think when it comes, you might disagree with this statement, but when it comes to secondhand storytelling or storytelling through like this medium, it does not mean it's in continuity. It might just be how the artistic representation of the story unfolding is being utilized. That makes sense.
Right.
But
Sometimes the story being told with the images isn't the same as the story being told with the dialogue,
mhm,
and that's something that you just kind of have to take and, like, interpret yourself, decide what you take with what, and that's that one of Silent Hill's biggest problems. There I
absolutely.
fucking go talking about Silent Hill
But you're
again, but
right. You're 100% right. And I would even say, Resident Evil, all things considered, has a very fluid, dynamic story. But there is a reason why I commonly say it almost feels like we're reading an archive and then playing a game about the archive
right.
being read.
Right, there are so many holes in continuity and how things play out on screen and what we're actually being told that you can't help but wonder if it's just somebody's files somewhere, somebody going through the past, and like all these Resident Evil remakes are a more close interpretation of what should be actually happening.
Right. And that to me is what we're talking about, is like that definition of secondary or storytelling through imagery. Because when you're working on a game, like I can write you a story, Red. I can write you a 300-page document of exactly how I want a video game to be laid out. And when you design and craft that world, it will not be my image. It will be your image with my writing.
Right, and that's exactly how cooperation works in video game
Yeah.
development and in production in general. Who would have thought many artistic creative decisions come together in one place and they may not all be the same. And that's fine.
I think that's
That's
also
why the audience gets to interpret things, that's
right.
why interpretation is such a good thing. You're kind of connecting the dots so we don't have to.
I think that's also why, like, from like an emotional, philosophical like perspective, when you play certain games, it's very obvious when the director has overt control over the game because things just don't fall into places naturally.
Right.
Like LA Noir, I think is a phenomenal game, but when you sit down and you play it, the
It's
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 bland.
not great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you can tell where the artist really shined and then it's just like empty. And then the artist shined again and then it's empty. Uh,
Cyberpunk 2077 is a big amount of you really need to look at and listen to everything going on to know what like the overall story is. If you
yeah.
were going to take that as its face value and you'd never read a source book, you knew jack shit about Cyberpunk, you would really have to like interpret how things in the world work, and that it's such a complicated mess because the visuals are nowhere near the dialogue and they kind of clash with each other more often than they help each other.
And Cyberpunk is such a complicated game in and of itself because
It's a fucking disaster. What are you talking
yeah,
about?
it's a disaster. But if let's say we're talking about the board games and the books and
Oh,
everything,
those are incredible.
incredible. And I feel like the game tried to capture like the complexity of the nomads versus the gangs versus the corporations, and it just didn't really do it all that well.
It all got lost on one source book and the story of Johnny Silverhand. If you want the truth, like, I don't blame Keanu Reeves for this because it's not his fault. The way the story was driven by Johnny Silverhand and not the protagonist is a problem.
I agree.
Because that means things you see don't line up a lot of the time and their perspectives are constantly conflicting. So that means the story and what you're supposed to be fighting for and believe in throughout it are constantly conflicting. There's no real clear, this is morally what you should be doing, this isn't, you know?
Right. It's definitely like I think like I know you're not a big fan of like Breath of the Wild because the world has that empty feel that we were just discussing. But
Right,
like when you play Breath of the Wild and if you're just solely interested in the exploration of Hyrule, right? And you're just solely looking around, you can see like just how I don't want to use the term pathetic, but like tiny Hyrule is because of the calamity and all of the chaos that has disrupted this kingdom. You know what I
right.
mean?
You kind of, they don't really talk too much about it. You just kind of have to see it.
Right. And I think that's a wonderful way of doing secondhand narratives where you can stand on top of this mountain and you can see these ruins. You don't know the war that occurred. That's not what's important in the dialogue. When you're walking through it, you get to feel those emotions of like, this is bad. I think Elden Ring did it very good too.
I was gonna say, Souls games, Souls-like games
Hmm.
from software titles in general, dating all the way back to their inception, are like that, and they're really good at imagery storytelling. Evergrace really fast became one of my favorite games of all time.
It's a beautiful game.
It's incredible. It's such an underappreciated classic, and you really have to pay attention to what you're looking at to know what's going on because they don't tell you a lot.
No, they tell you almost nothing. And I mean, they straight up in the beginning of the game, they're like, "This is a mysterious land. We don't know what's going on here. You're evil here for some reason." It's like,
Right,
"Oh."
and that's all you get.
It's like, "Okay. Figure it out." Yeah. But I mean, it even gets more granular. I mean, like when you play something like Elden Ring, you have the shine of the guiding sparkles, right? Telling you generally where to go. And
Right.
us as game developers and writers, we see that and we're like, oh, we're going to go over explore different areas. But to the normal person, that is a guiding force that is not forcing your hand. And it's just genius. Like when game developers know how to use lighting and effects to guide a player without having them get lost is genius.
Not even just to guide a player on where to go or what to do, but to guide a player on, like, how you should be feeling in the moment.
Mhm.
Atmosphere makes so much difference when you're telling a story with imagery. That's why the Fallout 3 and New Vegas vaults work so well.
Facts.
The atmosphere, the way the lighting's engine works, the way the systems are put in place for light maps to kind of really green things out or really red things. I don't know if you've ever worked with the creation kit, but a lot of the ambient light settings are incredibly dynamic. There was so much option and opportunity for those games.
Lighting to me is easily one of the most important aspects to a game.
Easily. Your atmosphere makes or breaks you.
Like, okay, like Dead Space. I just recently did a playthrough of Dead Space, and in Dead Space, throughout the playthrough of it, I was slowly remastering it using reshade. Right, I was doing ray tracing, color grading, and everything live during a live stream, and as I was beating the game. And what I noticed is when I was playing with the default settings, nothing felt off limits. Everything was lit up. The illumination was fine. Nothing was too dark. And then I turned on Magic HDR.
Yeah, and HDR kind of ruins a lot of lighting in places because it changes the lighting away from what it's intended to be.
Right.
The whole vibe is different. Like you play Halo with the lights turned all the way down, and Halo 1 can feel like a horror game at times.
Oh yeah.
But then you turn the gamma up and say screw the flashlight and it's a different game.
Yeah, it's more of an action RPG at that point. Like the Flood don't carry that weight of sheer impossibility and
Right, even the
fear.
Covenant at the beginning, elites, the first time a player sees an elite, I imagine that's gotta be incredibly rough in the dark in the middle of a closed corridor hallway.
In space.
Yeah,
Like,
in space. There's a lot that goes into that, and
uh,
the lighting sells it. If you change that, the vibe is just
mhm.
different.
Yeah, I think the Halo first mission is a great example. But I highly recommend that if people haven't seen my Dead Space, just skip around in it because at the very end, I do a full HDR, full remaster, rework the entire lighting with ray tracing, and the entire vibe is just dismal, horrifying. You only can really see through Isaac's mask, which I did a whole flashlight mod live. Horrifying, dude. Like you turn around and there's necromorphs fleeing from the darkness after you. It's horrifying.
Little bit of lighting would have gone a long way to help Silent Hill Downpour.
Oh my god, yes. And just reworking how the world works.
Yeah, well, I if you think of it as its own entry without it being Silent Hill, if you think of it as its own game,
Mhm.
it would be much better if the lights were just a little better.
Oh yeah,
Being a Silent Hill game hurts it, but, like, ultimately, that's not the killer for it.
I agree. But we'll get into more granular stuff. But I think you were onto something with the Halo 1 first mission
Right.
because like there's no experience really after that until like you get to the library and you're dealing with the flood. I would even say the mission before the library. But like this is the first game and they're introducing this alien species in pitch black narrow hallways where you don't have a weapon and you're just running. Like if that's your first experience with Halo, that is terrifying. You don't
Right,
know you're a super soldier yet.
at that point, you're playing Doom 3, you're kind of just there.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I feel like this craft goes completely unappreciated by a lot of people because not a lot of people, I would say some people
It's easy to
miss.
growing up with what I grew up with, a lot of stuff, 2010 to 2015, blue and colorless you know, and
Mhm.
I think the vibe is, like, one of those things that's passing on with how media itself progressed. We wound up with a darker color scheme with a lot less color and a lot less vibrance and a lot more listening to quiet things, and I don't know, I never got the immersive part of all that. Maybe it works in a theater. I don't go to theaters.
Mhm.
Here at my house, in the comfort of my chair,
Here in
that
my
kind of
garage.
lighting doesn't work. Here in my garage!
I think Resident Evil, okay, Resident Evil 2 and 3, both of them, do a really good job with light pathing. And light pathing, and people are curious, is just follow the street lights because there's nothing in the darkness. You don't need to go over there. It's in the light. Follow the light. They do a really good job of that because deviation is rewarded because you're going into the scarier sections. You don't know what's in there, and they will reward you for that. So I feel
Right.
like Resident Evil does that probably the best, in my opinion.
Mirror's Edge. So I don't give EA a lot of credit for anything ever. I almost never talk about games from EA. But the
There's a
first
reason.
Mirror's Edge is brilliant with its color design.
Oh, I agree.
The red marked positions are not the only places you can go to perform parkour, and it turns out that many faster routes are hidden in that field of white that's in front of you.
Right.
Ultimately, they use the color to throw you off of what is the most efficient path.
Hmm. It's a you're playing this game for the first time. We're gonna hold your hand, but at the same time, it's still gonna be playing the game. You're still gonna have to figure stuff out,
Right.
but we're holding your
Uh,
hand essentially.
The more you play it, the more you play it, the more you realize that you could just be better at it. You see more things that you can run up and do things with. You realize that you're not bound to the red lines, and the whole game changes.
Hmm.
And
Because
the color is greatly attributed to that.
right, I mean, that's falling so much into like color theory as well because that game changes its colors so frequently. So you'll be
Right.
in like the blue area, which is much more calm. You have a less police presence, and then it's green and yellow, and then you get reds, and everything is
Everything
significant.
everything is this bright contrast away from the path that they give you.
Hmm.
It all sticks with itself. So you look at it and it's just blank scenery, an empty field that you wouldn't pay a second mind to.
Hmm.
And it's a good way to use color to misdirect the player.
Right. Like we want you to focus here, not over there, over here.
Right.
And I mean, some games, struggle with this, and I would say Silent Hill is one of those games that struggle with this. Like, if you don't know what you're doing in Silent Hill does not hold your hand
Right.
90% of the time. It is do or die, figure it out.
One of my favorite not holding your hand games is Resident Evil, the remake, the original. Just because of how empty it is.
Right.
You're given no direction.
Mhm.
Nobody tells you where to go or what to do. It's just you, the house, and some doors that happen to be open.
Right.
From there, you work out what to do. It's a giant escape room.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, the term survival horror is thrown around quite frequently when it comes to, Resident Evil titles and things like that. But I don't think very many modern survival titles really follow the same perspective of what the escape room mentality of those early games were.
And you know what? Resident Evil 7 does that so beautifully and
Right.
acknowledges it.
Right. But it also uses modern mechanics of lighting and stage play and
Right.
noises to direct the
And
player into the answering that question.
And even in the original Resident Evil remake, the backgrounds, the ambiance, the way every room was colored and toned set the vibe for you. Bright colors, bright hallways told you to be ready and be excited because something was coming. Dark hallways told you to be very careful because something could be hiding and waiting to could jump out at you. There was always something
Hmm.
that the color meant in each room when you walked in that kind of built up to it. The first room, right when you walk into the mansion and into the dining room is dark. There's a single fire, there's very dimly lit everywhere, and there's not much color, and it builds up. It slowly gets darker until that first zombie encounter. And
Right.
when that happens, by that point, it's so dark that it's just you and this thing in a progressively dark area creeping on you, turning to look at you. The color itself is what has built that tension inside of you that's building up that scare that comes when you see the thing for the first time. And it's not a jump scare. It's supposed to be a feeling of terror, a feeling of dread, like, oh shit, this thing is really dangerous.
Right. And then that's imagery. That's using imagery to tell you that story of, hey,
Right.
and there are
They
games that don't do this well. I have seen playthroughs of games, they're unrememberable. That's the problem. Is I don't
right.
have examples.
Resident Evil didn't have to tell you you were walking into danger. You just fucking did.
Yeah, you knew entering that hallway, all of a sudden, you're in this big room and then you're in a little room and it's like, oh shit, like this is staging something big.
Layers of Fear
Oh
is
god.
such a phenomenal
Mhm.
masterpiece when it comes to set changing and how that works. The dynamicism and imagery and color and tone is incredible. One of the most artistically vivid games I've ever seen.
It doesn't just have to be horror game either. Layers of Fear does a phenomenal job, but you know
Right.
what else does? Sunset Overdrive.
Yeah. Sunset Overdrive wouldn't work without its color scheme. Honestly, it feels like a comic book and plays like a comic book. And if it didn't have its cartoon color scheme, it would be pretty boring, not gonna lie.
It would have I mean, Jet Set Radio Future is another one of those games where it's very specifically designed to flow with its music and its ambiance and its
Right.
overarching themes of like we're hip hop, Japanese hip hop, we're this very, Western punk. But if that was like realism, it just wouldn't really hit.
Oddworld Stranger's Wrath, I just bought that, the HD remaster.
Right.
And something I loved about that game for the longest time is how well it uses its oranges, browns, and grays to build this place is decrepit and dilapidated feeling without making it feel terrifying. Because it's a hard feeling to nail. Making something feel run down without making it feel like you could be walking into a horror scene. Because even Fallout feels like a horror game sometimes.
Right.
But Oddworld Stranger's Wrath never does.
Hmm.
It feels more like a rareware platformer with a much grittier vibe to it.
Which is so dope. Like, how do you make a platformer scary?
It's rough.
It's
Really is hard.
that's not easy. Um,
Rareware did it by Squirrel Gets Drunk. I mean,
yeah, I think adult toning is a lot easier because you can emphasize writing, but you could take something super cheery like SpongeBob and fit it into like a like style game, and it can still be scary through the artistic representation of what's happening.
right.
Um,
I've storytelling through imagery, totally away from video games. I've been watching, spent a little time watching SpongeBob conspiracy theories a little while back. And
okay.
I'm not going to lie, some of them are fruity, but a
Hmm.
lot of them make a lot of sense. And the imagery in that show is insane. The way they hide things, little details and story continuity that carry over between things, and little creative decisions where you can tell the team is telling a story that they're not telling you through the dialogue.
Another one is
And something as simple as SpongeBob.
yeah, another one that's very popular right now is Total Drama Island. There's this fan theory because people have been rewatching it because apparently there's two new seasons or something coming out. I don't know. I don't watch it, so but the
That
fan theory is that Izzy is not crazy. Izzy is an actor who is playing a specific role. That's why she never actually leaves the show and always comes back. That's her
right.
job. That's what she's meant to do. So this big overarching crazy character is just an actor on the show. It's really
It
interesting.
yeah, it is. And I think it would make it even more interesting if they actually gave more of a shit about it sometimes. Because there's oftentimes in shows and games where they do such a fine job telling a large amount of visual story, and then it's fucking stale for God knows how long.
I don't think this is really anybody in particular's fault. Um, when things come through by writers and then all of a sudden, like maybe a character is stripped away. This happened with Izzy. Izzy just didn't show up for a whole season, apparently. I don't think that's the or the artist or the writer's fault. I think the writer had a clear image of what they wanted to have represented, and then the artist did what they wanted to represent while also doing what the writer wants. but those don't always cohesively mesh, which is why fan theories are so fun.
Right. Because there's a good chance that everybody's right.
Yes.
From either perspective, there's a good chance that both parties are right to a degree.
This is why I just tweeted this earlier today. We need to have a larger conversation on continuity versus canonicity, because something can be in the continuity, meaning it definitely happened, where a canon could be, yes, this happened, but it doesn't really mean anything. Or it
And if
means
it doesn't mean
everything.
anything, yeah, it could mean so much. And if it doesn't mean anything, then why are you misleading the viewer?
Right. And maybe it's for a greater purpose. Maybe you want a sub story
But
occurring with a different character.
don't be
Wolfenstein
Rick
does
and
it.
Morty season 3.
I
I
was going Wolfenstein route, but okay.
was gonna say, don't be Rick and Morty season 3. Don't just start misleading everybody for the fucking hell of it to build up to nothing.
Unless that's what you wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, like, if that is what you wanted to do, you accomplished it, but what the fuck?
Not everybody can write
Like,
hard candy. Like, that's just the reality. Not everybody
do
can
you do
write
you
hard
wri
candy.
do people write things like that because they get enjoyment out of watching other people fucking twinge at them? Like,
Absolutely.
Hard Candy was made well, I'm not gonna deny that, but it's such a hard movie to watch
Oh, I
because no
strongly
matter
agree,
how
yeah.
much no matter how much I agree with Ellen Page in the movie, it's also I don't agree with her because, wow, is that really fucked up on the part of everybody,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
I mean, you gotta admit Elliot Page's role was fucking incredible.
It was yeah, she did a phenomenal job, but that doesn't change the fact that she was like, I watched Dexter,
Mhm.
and it's the same thing. I am definitely on board to watch and see how it plays out with him doing what he does, but at the same time, I also have to keep in mind he's kind of a fucking serial killer.
Yeah.
Takes out bad guys, yes, but is also one of the bad guys.
Are you ready for the full circle, Red? Are you ready for it? Silent Hill 2.
Yeah, exact. James Sunderland is not a fucking reasonable, rational character that you should look at and be like, I like that guy. Because he is a dickhead.
In the writing, this is where a lot of people have trouble with storytelling through imagery. Through the writing, James Sunderland does not seem like that bad of a person. It's through the imagery and the events that occur that tell you James Sunderland is a low life, scumbag, wife murdering piece of shit.
It's unfortunate, man, because like if you as the player can't see that, then you go the entire story ignorant and feeling bad for this fucking human garbage.
Right. Which you're not supposed to. He's getting what he
Right.
deserves. That's the whole point. But
Right.
if people can't see the greater storytelling, it's hard for you to fully understand what Silent Hill is trying to tell you.
Right. And
Or
like I
Resident
could
Evil.
see like Resident Evil. You might not understand that the larger story at play is data being sold for biological weapons and specialists being chosen to collect that data.
It goes even deeper. Like
It's
Resident Evil,
unwilling. There's a lot of simulation involved, and Umbrella's massive experiments are
mhm,
world changing and defining. That's how that is.
it just it's a story about Claire or it's a story about Leon. It's not always a story about Claire or Leon or Chris or Ethan. Sometimes it's a story about what is Umbrella doing. It's a story
What
about
the fuck happened to Billy Cohen?
yeah, it's a story about what the fuck happened to Billy Cohen.
Honestly,
That's the whole
that's
game.
the one lingering question we have left. What the hell happened to Billy?
It's does Disney own Umbrella Corporation, which is an actual theory,
Yeah,
by the way.
yeah, they do. I've got my Umbrella Corporation flag here in the back behind me. I love this
I have my Brotherhood of Steel,
thing.
which I've said this before. I fly the Brotherhood of Steel flag in my show. Ironically,
Because they suck.
they suck, but
And they don't
people
tell you that, but the
love
imagery
them.
tells you that.
Yeah, they are a literal fascist regime of horrible horribleness. They've done horrible things, and people like praise the ground that the Brotherhood of Steel walks on. It makes no sense to me. Play the game. Pay attention. It's wild. You're not supposed to like Brotherhood of Steel. You're not supposed to like the Outcasts.
Right. You're not supposed to like it. That's the outcasts are huge pieces of shit.
Yeah.
Coming from a group of huge pieces of shit that they grew up amongst.
They're literally like the KKK. That's what people don't understand. Like, the Outcasts were literally collecting people and mass executing them because they didn't agree with their ideals. That happened.
Yeah.
Like,
There was a reason the NCR had no problem just rolling over the solar plant. That I mean,
story through
would you want to
imagery.
leave it in control of them either?
No. But if you follow the narrative of the game, you are being deceived. You are being lied to. You need to pay attention and create your own opinion as a player to understand the greater gravitas of what is happening.
Using your eyes a little fucking bit instead of just listening and going brainless to whatever the hell's go on in front of you. I mean, like, I can't tell you how many times I've tunnel visioned out and totally missed a bunch of shit. I didn't know for half of my first time playing Man of Medan that what I was doing was hallucinating
Right. Yeah, I
until I
feel like
kind
a
of
lot of
figured it
people
out.
didn't know that.
Right, they have to literally give it to you. But my second time through, I went back, I looked. There are so many things that immediately give away that that's what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That first scene on the ship, you can tell that's what's happening.
I mean, there's so many games where, I mean, if you're not paying attention, things will just go right out the window. I mean, What Remains of Edith Finch is a wonderful example where people collectively don't really understand the story that's being told, but it's a story of depravity, essentially. Like, there is murder within the household occurring. Somebody is not happy with things and is taking it into their own hands and hurting people. You don't see that, but you are told that and you are shown that quite overtly.
You play a game like Fallout 4 and you might think the Institute is a horrible place until you realize that they're just trying to do technology. It's unfortunate that their synths happen to get aggressive with things that are out in the wasteland, but they don't expose themselves to the wasteland. It's not a question of morals for them. It's a question of technology. And you really only think about that if you pay attention to how things look in the environment around them, how they behave, the way that not what they say, but the way that they sound when they say things.
Right. I mean, I feel like the Institute fits so well into the Fallout narrative because they're this or not socially. They're this technocratic isolationist mentality who almost are nihilistic in their message and nihilistic in their presence, where they're
And
literally
ultimately,
just trying to create a being to carry on humanity. They're doing everything that they can to just not end the world.
and ultimately, they don't fuck with anybody until a synth escapes. Nobody ever gets hurt by the Institute unless its patrols are out looking for a lost synth.
Right.
It's not like they go looking for conflict or creating world war.
Which is, again, when the Brotherhood of Steel show up and they're looking for the Institute, should be a huge red flag to you that, hey, maybe the Brotherhood of Steel are not the good guys.
Yeah.
Neither is the Institute. Like, again, it's a very politically charged game that makes you question yourself and your own morality and how you view the world. Literally the point of the game.
It's
Complicated.
horrible. It's horrible to think, but in Fallout 3, the real hero is Liam Neeson and nobody else. Because no matter which ending you take, whether you take the ending where you side with the Enclave and poison the FEV creatures, or you don't and you just purify the water, both factions that want you to do these things are horrible factions that do terrible things, and nobody's really morally right in the decisions that they're making when they have you do it. Ultimately, the only person who just gave a shit about the wasteland was Liam Neeson's character, the father, being like, hey, I just want to make clean water.
Fact. It's just a fact. Like, when you have, but that's not fun for the player. Like, very clear, morally correct decisions are not fun.
Right. You can't in a decision like that, you don't really have morals. You know that no matter what, to do the one heroic thing, you're gonna make a terrible decision.
Right. And if you've watched my playthrough, I almost always just purify the water and kill everybody else. Because to me, you know, that is to me the objectively best answer is just, hey, let's not kill everybody.
Right.
Let's not hurt people. Let's help
Right.
people.
Super mutants build societies. They don't deserve to be genocided, maybe.
That's why Fox is such an amazing character because no matter what, I mean, he was a doctor beforehand, if I'm not mistaken. And at the end, he's like, we just need to save the world. And if that means I walk in here because I'm the only one that can survive, so be it. He's like, I could
Right.
die, but it doesn't matter because like I'll be
Right.
saving everybody else.
Right. And you can just see by the way the
Strong.
way he behaves with the player that the vibe's supposed to be that he is the old hero in this instance. You are supposed to learn something here.
Right.
Instead of being the hero in the moment, you're learning something from somebody who already was in your position.
Legends. Like
Right.
legendary character. Like I know people talk about like Gob or not Gob, Raul, other characters like that, but if you like
I-
delve into the imagery and their storytelling, they're not good people.
Right. Raul himself, if you go through his entire quest line, will tell you he is not a great guy.
Yep. Straight up says it to you. But I wanted to bring something else up, and that is the game Unfinished Swan.
I don't know what that is.
The Unfinished Swan is a game where the entirety of the screen is white when you start up the game. And you throw black paint balls to put black onto the world, and that exposes the environment so you can traverse it.
Oh, this looks incredibly interesting.
It is phenomenal because you have no idea what you're walking into at all times. You have no idea what you're missing. You don't know what the developers have hidden. You have no idea until you start painting things.
Superliminal is an interesting one.
Oh yeah.
The way the environment is constantly changing, and a lot of the story is told with that changing environment. Really, you have to watch a lot of Superliminal a lot more than you play it.
Oh yeah. Same thing with like LSD Dream Emulator. It's a lot of
Right.
understanding what they're trying to put forth. And in a lot of cases it's supposed to be unanswerable. That is the point.
Right. It's a man's freaking dream journal. It's nonsense from the back of his subconscious, jotted down in a notebook over the course of a year. Like, what do you expect it to be? You're not supposed to get a bunch of ridiculous, insanely good, in-depth storytelling. You're supposed to see vivid imagery like somebody would see in their subconscious while they're having a dream.
Right. It's so
It's a
good.
dream emulator.
So good. And it's art. And that's another
Right.
thing is like you cannot objectify video games when it is art. People can like whatever they want to like, but at the end of the day there are tools to make something that might not be subjectively that appealing more subjectively
Right.
appealing.
Right. Video games are contemporary.
Mhm.
A lot
Interesting.
more contemporary than a lot of other mediums.
Have you played Subliminal?
I don't know.
Subliminal is a game where you interact with objects, and then depending on the depth at which they are, it changes the scale of that object for you to solve puzzles. Um,
Alice in Wonderland.
very, very crazy, but it would have been very easy to turn that game into a psychedelic game, but they didn't. They went with a little bit more of a avant-garde Half-Life Gmod kind of
Since we're on
styling.
puzzle games, Portal and the Rat
Portal,
Man.
yeah.
Excellent storytelling visually. Because you don't ever hear or see anything about the Rat Man. I mean, there's the comic, but that's not in game. The most you get is some giggling, some mumbling, and some scribbling on the walls.
Mhm. And I think more games need to be doing stuff like that. Like, I feel like GTA would benefit from more lore. I feel like people are scrambling for hidden lore in games like that because the developers just aren't putting enough in. I
Sometimes the best side characters are the ones that you can't even see.
Oh, yeah,
That's what makes
absolutely.
Ada such a good side character. Her sudden appearance is encompassed by this shadow of mystery that leaves the player wondering and interpreting what the hell she was doing between all of that time.
Ada
Playing
Wong,
sep
Resident Evil 4,
even
everybody.
even playing separate ways kind of changes the dynamic a little bit because 'cause you're like, "Okay, but what was she doing in between those times then?"
Right. Yeah. I mean, telling a story through like subjective characters and things like that is even more fascinating because you can manipulate the player's emotional situation. Like some people love Ada Wong, some people hate Ada Wong. It really depends on how you subjectively view that character.
Right. If you pay attention to the ultimate actual decision making at hand, you really is. I mean, she's just doing her job.
I mean, even that statement is hard to justify because
Right.
Ada could be a double agent for all we know.
Right. So, what is her job? Ultimately, like doing her job could encompass even this broad tree of interpretable ideas.
Hmm. Which just opens up so much more interpretation for the game.
But the most you see really is small communication between her and some other characters, and you kind of have to piece together where everything's from just with that
Right.
small bits of context, hints.
Super interesting. Do you want to get more granular?
I'm Sandy.
Sandy, okay.
You say us get granular, boy.
Well, what I mean by get granular is like obviously you're going to struggle with things like color theory, being colorblind, but you still understand color theory.
Right. I'm
But
not. I don't have all of my color gone. Just some of it,
right.
and I remember what color looked like.
It still matters though. Like if you struggle with seeing things like red or purple or blues or those things kind of blur together, certain emotional impacts won't land the same.
Yeah, I don't even see blue.
See? And I think blue is one of the lesser important ones, but I mean, blue is a very calming color and things like that. It's usually associated with serenity and stuff like that. Um,
I always kind of took blue as like a this is the end of the road kind of color.
yeah, you could say that.
Like, you know, a lot of sci-fi movies, like Blade, for instance, uses blue as a very this is the end of the movie, end of the road kind of color.
Right,
Most of the movies, like a dark red, dark grays, greens. There's a lot of extreme amounts of red in the movie Blade, but then like you get to the end and the internal workings and shit, and it's subtle blues and a few really light greens with you know this feeling of like, okay, this is where things end. This is where I need to keep my eyes the most open.
right. And
The bright colors encourage that.
this is color theory that is nothing new. What you're describing is nothing new. In the Matrix, even when they're flying the ship and they pull above the clouds right before they're attacked, they see the sky for the first time. It's like the first time we really see blue in this normal world in the Matrix. And for a moment, there's peace and serenity. The music calms down, it all swells down for a minute. Blue is commonly associated with this end or serenity or humanity color. Very fascinating, the use of the color blue. So within color theory, if you have something like say Fallout 3, you never really see a blue sky.
Yeah, it's green. I
Yep.
mean, the whole game is green to show you that the DC wasteland is probably one of the most irradiated parts of the entire planet.
Hmm.
That's why it's so green, because it probably got struck the hardest. They try to enforce that the glowing sea is the only other thing that shares that same constant green tinge.
Right.
Why would DC need a water purifier and not Vegas, you know?
Because desalinators help collects radiation. So if you have desalinators, you have to less concern about radon.
Right.
which is
And
interesting. Sorry, side note.
you encompass that with the amount of damage that one place would take over another, and ultimately you end up with this incredibly different dynamic spectrum in color. In New Vegas, you get these bright blue skies and these orange and purple tinges, and
Hmm.
there's a lot of true to real world daytime. And then in Fallout 3, just to reinforce that this place is dying, you're covered in radiation no matter where you are, is that dark green tinge everywhere.
Well, New Vegas, just to get a little bit more granular, when you wake up from the grave at night, or when you go back to the grave site, I should say, because you wake up at Doc Mitchell's house and you look out at night, you can see Las Vegas. You can see it, New Vegas, off there in the distance. You're not there. You
Right.
can just see it. It is this ever present point from all these different locations that you can see, but you can't just walk there. You can't just go there. It's not that
No,
simple.
it's going to be a journey. The distance is so great, the light is so dim. It's going to be a journey.
Hmm. It's set up to be this beacon, and then you get there, it's more depravity. It's
It
setting
might
up
not
hope, and then it strips that hope away.
it might not seem so important to have props in a scene, but the more props you have in a scene, building the world and telling the story and showing that this world is lived in, the more the world is lived in, the more it feels dynamic and immersive. It pulls in the viewer, the player, the listener, if you're the audio kind.
Right. Hi, everybody. This is an audio podcast.
Right.
um,
Use our words to take a mental image of the things we say, when we say them, and interpret things once in a while. Who knows? Maybe there's lore hidden in the background.
GTA, GTA 3. During the rise in the dislike for the murder sprees and things like that within GTA, a lot of people were like, "Well, it's not real. It doesn't feel real. It's clearly a video game." That was very commonly stated. And one of the things that points to these games not feeling real is a lack of props, a lack of humanity.
Right.
Everything feels roboticized. Nothing feels like reality.
Right. And the more real games get, the more the more they shred that thin thread between fantasy and reality and how they tell stories, the less I enjoy video games, believe it or not. I like
I
to draw a
understand,
clear
yeah.
line between fantasy and reality.
But some games do it really well.
Yeah.
Like
Some
Resident
games
Evil
are
7 and
incredibly
8.
authentic.
Like Resident Evil 7 and 8 did it really well. Like clearly these places are lived in, but they're also absurd.
Right. The creatures are absurd, the people are absurd, the situation's absurd. Even you, the hero, are absurd.
Yeah.
And you know that. No matter how real anything looks, no matter how crazy things get on screen, you always know that this shit's just unreal.
Yeah. And I feel like that's one of the things that made the very opening scene of Village very important because Ethan's home felt like a home. It felt lived in. It was a moment of reality and then the absurdity came after.
Jill's apartment at the beginning of Resident Evil 3 remake, there's a reason they did that. It's to remind you that Jill is a human being.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, sure, her ribs might be superhuman, but she herself is a human being.
Master of lockpicks.
The master of lockpicks, the master of unlocking and the master of not breaking ribs.
I got this lockpick for you, the master of lockpick. But I mean, this is a dichotomy that people, so many people are talking about. We want more realism. We want more realism. No, you
I
fucking don't. You don't.
I've That's been the argument, I've heard that constantly since the inception of the PlayStation 3 and forward, right? Since the
Hmm.
concept of the PlayStation 3 and forward, I was like, I heard from friends and people around me that they wanted more realism and they wanted it to be more realistic. And I always thought to myself, what the fuck does that mean? Like, how does that make it more fun?
It makes it less fun,
Right. What are you doing to make the shit actually more? You know what makes Saints Row so much fun? It's fucking ridiculous.
right? I mean,
I
realism
don't
can be fun. Scum is a great example where you have an entire body to manage. I mean, everything from vitamins, calories, food intake, water,
Scum is a
peeing,
fantastic
pooping,
example. Medicine, you get sicknesses.
medicine, STDs, everything. Like you can get anything, but it's still absurd. You're sneaking past giant mech robots that gun you down.
You're a bunch of prisoners trapped on an island.
And there's like zombies and stuff. Like they still have to match the realism with absurdity. The houses are empty. The empties are houses.
Yeah. The empties are houses. They're just random houses walking around in video games. Final Fantasy VII, this anime does good things.
Right.
Final Fantasy VII Remake gave me walking enemy houses, and that was a great time for me.
Or the Hell House.
Yeah. This is a great boss fight.
I don't think people truly want realism in video games because where's the fun in that? Like going to a 9 to 5 in your job? That doesn't sound like fun.
Right. I think the realism where we make things look more clean and discernible, but don't forget that it's a fantasy is the best kind of realism.
I still disagree with that. I think some applications work with high levels of realism. Some applications. Resident Evil 3 looks very, very good, but there is enough absurdity and arcadey nonsense to then distinguish that this is not real, right? The or Resident Evil 3 remake, right?
Right.
But what happened like things like Parappa the Rappa? Imagery was being used to tell a story.
Right. You listen to music and you press the button inputs, and none of that shit has anything to do with the story being told in the world around you. You can just kind of see what's happening.
Kirby, Mario. I mean, there's so many phenomenal examples of anti-realism games that are super popular.
That tell an amazing story. I again have to point back to Final Fantasy. It's anime. It's
Mhm.
not realistic. It's anime. And it's very clearly anime, and it fucking works. It's a good balance of really smooth models that doesn't equal realism, by the way. It just equals smoother models and its style.
And then when you get more granular with these kinds of things, especially with video game development, we have ray tracing, we have these tools to do amazing lighting techniques. But when you load up Resident Evil 3 remake, they're still light pathing you. You still can't go outside boundaries. Like you can't just jump over a fence and start running around Raccoon City willy-nilly because that's not the point of the game. There is still
Right.
limitations that are being displayed.
Right.
Which
Clearly, there's a story being told, and you're being guided along that.
Mhm. And that's imagery through storytelling or storytelling through imagery because that's not where Jill went. That's not where Claire went. That's not where Chris went. There's a reason why you don't get to go outside those boundaries because that's not important to the story. That's not the story they're telling.
I'm going to dig into my past real quick and say that some of the best examples of visual storytelling I have ever seen is classic Call of Duty Zombies.
Yeah,
From
yeah.
World at War to Black Ops 3, uh, classic Call of Duty Zombies was just an excellently told story that had so much going for it, and it made sense where it worked. You could tell certain things just by looking at certain things, getting small pieces of context from the environment. You knew where you were based on how things looked, and you knew how to feel based on how things looked. And
The new
I
Modern Warfare did that like ridiculously well.
I don't even care.
The new one?
New Call of Duty is garbage. I don't
No, the new one was phenomenal. And that's coming from
everything
me.
like everything like everything Black Ops 4 and forward for me was kind of really garbage.
Oh, you need to play the new Call of Duty Modern Warfare then. It was phenomenal.
I think it's stale. But I was also a fan of Call of Duty for my entire life.
But
Right? I
it
still am.
doesn't but Call of Duty Modern Warfare doesn't follow the tropes of old Modern Warfare. It's a new imagery. It's like it
But
I don't know how to describe it, but when I played it, I didn't feel like I was playing Call of Duty.
fair enough. It's a lot more akin to a Battlefield arcade style.
No, even there I disagree. I honestly like the the breaking and entering situations, and like a lot of the situation that the characters were put in, storytelling through imagery, didn't feel like your atypical Call of Duty. I mean, obviously Modern
Oh,
Warfare 2 did a
you
lot.
mean it did I mean, you mean it did all of those things that Call of Duty Ghosts did really well and then
Yes.
got totally shit on for?
Yes. But I mean, I'm not surprised that Call of Duty gets shit on for doing, really politically commentary heavy things about war and the crimes that people commit during war. I'm
They
not surprised that people hate that, because
they
it's a
do a
very
bad job.
hard.
They do a bad job knowing what lands and what doesn't, because they always tend to get rid of what doesn't and keep, or get rid of what does and keep what doesn't, and that's a problem.
It is a problem. It is. And oh my god, the beginning of Battlefield 1. Have you played Battlefield 1?
Yeah.
The intro. Oh my god, that is an impactful intro.
To
You are
remind you
oh,
of the impact of the entire piece of history that it comes from.
yeah, this
You see it, you're a part of it, and you just kind of observe from many different perspectives what the fuck is going on there, and it's
and you die,
chaos.
and they give you a name and a birth date and a death date. Ah, it's so good. It's so impactful. It's so heavy right out of the gate. It's like, this is important. This is a video game, but these are real things that actually happened. This is not a joke. So good. I love that. Some games do it really well, man. Even games like that, like I don't like and you don't like, but we can still identify that they're doing things that a lot of artists don't have the balls to do.
Right.
Hitman with the ghost Easter egg. That's another one. You have to have some balls to go out of your way to create an entire narrative about a ghost in a Hitman game.
Right. Because it's so unrelated. There's absolutely nothing ever that points to there being anything ghostly going on in any of those games.
Right. And then all of a sudden there's a narrative about a ghost. It's like what?
Right.
Um
Metal Gear Solid 2, the ghosts in the camera.
yes.
I mean, sure, it's just the developers and shit, but there's still a broader story being told there.
Absolutely. So good. So good. And when you get really granular, especially down to like the game design and color landscape, you could even look at architecture and how that all functions. When I was talking about the cradle and designing the cradle, one of the things that I very predominantly spoke heavily about was the architecture being this smooth, concrete, glazed, like it was wet, but it's not. Hasn't been rain. And that's all to be a very unnatural fear placed on the player of this living structure that
Right.
is, it's so absurd. And this game should be made in like Unreal 5 with super hyper intense realism because it'll work. The absurdity of the things you're fighting makes sense with that realism, and
Right.
using tiki
I again,
torches and things like
I
that.
I again disagree that smoother polygon and better looking thing equates to realism,
I know,
because there will always be style involved.
absolutely. Like, I want the tree line to be very dark. That way, you don't want to deviate from the trails too heavily because I don't want players getting lost. Things like that. I don't want to hold their hand, but at the same time, I want to kind of be like, hey, if you run off into the woods, you might not be able to find your way back very easily if you don't have smoke signals set up or GPSs set up and things like that.
Outlast 2 did a phenomenal job of giving the player the world.
Hmm. LS2 is terrifying too. Phenomenal.
Right.
One of the problems I have with giving the players too much freedom is backtracking, because the second you start backtracking, you've realized just how uninhabited that world is.
Right.
And
So
that
you don't give the player a reason to backtrack.
right.
You know, one of my favorite things, I've been playing through Kingdom Hearts again lately, and one of my favorite things about Kingdom Hearts is if you play through everything in order, you almost never have to go through everything a second time. In the
Yeah,
first Kingdom Hearts, it's different because you have to go through everything a second time to close the keyhole things. But even that's different. They give you different environments, different scenery, different bosses. They make it so much different.
right.
in already lived in worlds. I mean, there's a lot to give in a situation like that. The diversity needs to be there for the world to feel inhabited.
As a speedrunner, in speedrunning, one of the things we do is count spawns. So you will literally get a headshot, count that enemy, get another headshot, count that enemy, and you will try to figure out how many spawn, and then you'll have to look for things like trigger characters. So is there a specific enemy that spawns in a specific location that triggers you to be able to move? And I always found that really important because it means that we're trying to develop ways to maintain players within an environment. You can't progress unless you kill a trigger enemy. But if that trigger enemy decides that it's going to hide in a box in the corner where you can't find them and get stuck with bad pathfinding, well, that scene might not ever end.
Right.
So, I mean, it's fascinating to see how developers are trying to find ways to maintain a
Change,
cohesive world.
maintain a cohesive world, and at the same time change how the story is told.
Right. Because it's
What's
like,
our
oh,
timestamp looking like?
what?
What's our timestamp looking like?
We're at an hour.
Oh, okay.
But what I was gonna say was, having things like trigger responses or timers or character counts. I need to kill 12 enemies to progress through this room at a reasonable rate. So I'm gonna stand in this corner so that way their pathfinding walks through this area and I can mow them all down really quickly. Well, now you're just really granularizing a game and its mechanics and exploiting them to a certain point.
Right.
But if you can find a way to change up your code and have multiple spawn locations and maybe have a count on top of a trigger character, now you're getting into points where, a breach room has 30 characters for one person, 6 characters for another, and then a different scene, those numbers can flip flop for each player. That's a more lived in world. It feels more realistic. Your conversations about that game can be different.
The moral of the story: don't be the first Assassin's Creed. Don't take it home to your kid to have him test it before it goes out and have your kid tell you, "This shit's boring. Why are there no side quests?"
Or Mario Party, or not Mario Party, Super Mario 64, where the kids just tried to run up a slope 100 times and you couldn't run up that slope and everybody thought the kids were stupid. That actually happened.
Hell is real.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't have these creepy pastas and things like that if it wasn't for imagery and storytelling
Right.
through imagery and stuff like that.
You wouldn't like some of your favorite games if it wasn't through imagery.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Super Hot is built on its imagery.
what hallway shooters, is that what they used to call them? You
Uh, on rail shooters?
when I say hallway shooters, I just mean it's like a corridor that you run down and there's like one objective, run to the next objective, run to the next objective.
Oh, so you mean like classic Call of Duty cover hallway shooter?
Yeah. Like they're
Oh, yeah.
those were fine for a while and then they were oversaturated and then they had to up the bar a little bit. And I mean you could release a typical hallway shooter today and it could do pretty well as long as you have really good lighting, color theory, you have good reasons for that story to take place. Like, we as players don't really care what the medium is anymore, as long as it's done well.
Right. By the way, the medium was done very well. Good job, Bloober team.
It was done very well. I hope Bloober Team moves
Mhm.
forward and expands upon it even further. I don't think it was as good as you think it was, but it was still good.
I think it was fucking excellent. I can't wait for a medium sequel. I wanna know more about the father character. I wanna know more about the Cold War stuff. I really think that there's an opportunity there for some of the greatest storytelling in psychological thriller history.
I mean, Silent Hill 1, but okay.
Go fuck your Silent Hill. I don't.
Silent Hill 1 is like the king of using imagery to tell a story.
First of all, go fuck yourself. No, it's not.
Yes, it
Silent
is.
Hill 1 does a fantastic job, But the king of telling a story through imagery, I think, right now, as it stands, is Elden Ring.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I'm not even the biggest fan of Elden Ring, but I gotta correct you and be like, Elden Ring is the one.
Okay, so retro games, downhill is king.
Right.
And then it's Resident Evil 1.
That's debatable. As much as I love Resident Evil 1's imagery, I think like a better example of imagery as a close second to that would be like Nightmare Creatures, because Nightmare Creatures doesn't exactly tell you the story. You just kind of have to figure out what's going on.
Nightmare Creatures is Bloodborne before Bloodborne.
Nightmare Creatures is one of the best hack and slash games ever made, way, way before its time.
Facts. Facts. I had it for the N64. Not as good. PS1 version, pretty damn good.
Just get it for the PC. What the fuck?
I know, right?
Yeah, just do that.
Just
Play Blood Rain. They're
FromSoft,
good.
just buy the IP and make Nightmare Creatures 1 and 2
Play
remake.
more video games.
Develop opinions based around more than just what you're told to believe.
And guess what? Tell us those opinions in the comments
Right.
because we'd like to have that discussion.
Because that's the whole point of this show.
Right.
You know, we just
And
pretty much just made a whole podcast episode on like what the point of our podcast is.
yeah, pretty much.
I just realized that
Hey, remember to subscribe for more,
of this,
of this.
but more granular and game specific.
More granular. We getting sandy, boy.
Why do you keep making fun of me for using that word?
Granular.
It is a funny word. Bye, everybody. Go subscribe to Red, subscribe to me. Have fun with your life.
Right.
Or wife.
And have a nice day.
Yeah.